Carbon dioxide is a colorless, odorless, non-poisonous gas formed by the combustion of carbon and in the respiration of living organisms. It is considered a greenhouse gas, and with the production of this gas comes many negative side effects, yet humans seem to be producing more and more as time goes on. Amongst the various ways humans produce this gas include transportation and industry, as well as animal agriculture. In fact, animal agriculture makes up for 18% of greenhouse gases, which may not seem like a whole lot, but this percentage is actually more than the combined exhaust from all transportation. The farming industry is heavily involved in the production of CO2, but they also take a big hit when it comes to its negative side effects on the environment. Production of CO2 in the atmosphere contributes to the greenhouse effect, warming that results when the atmosphere traps heat radiating from the Earth. This greenhouse effect causes an increase in temperatures, making it more difficult to grow and sustain crops, and also causes a decrease in available water. This ripples out into our supermarkets, as prices on our already underconsumed fruits and vegetables continue to rise. This affects not only farmers, but consumers alike, and especially local farmers and farmers markets, and as well as the consumer, who is now being asked to pay higher prices for their everyday foods.
A common misconception is that cars, trains, and planes are the main contributors, but that is simply not the case. Greenhouse gases in our environment are caused by animal agriculture, whether it be through animal-based foods or plants, such as beef cows or even wheat, cause nearly 65% of gases that are harmful to the environment. Nitrogen dioxide and oxide gases have 296 harmful global warming hazards and will stay in the environment for up to 150 years.
As mentioned, animal agriculture is the largest producer of CO2. A way individuals can help is by reducing the consumption of dairy products and red meats, which will substantially change the output of methane. This does not mean everyone has to become vegetarian or vegan. However, if each person attempts to consume slightly less than usual of animal products, it could make a noticeable difference in the emissions. It is said that after methane gases from cows, the second leading cause of carbon emissions is from transportation. Whether it is from a car, bus, or train, it is polluting our earth, and it can be reduced with anyone's help. If everyone drives less, walks more, and even uses public transportation. Another way to decrease emissions is by purchasing local foods and goods. The greater the distance the merchandise has to travel, the increased use of excess carbon-emitting vehicles. Besides purchasing local goods, if a consumer does not buy as many products, especially if they do not need them, then companies will not produce as much. This can help in two ways. One, they won't be using as much energy to produce unnecessary goods, and two, there will be fewer emissions because a smaller amount of transportation is needed. Reusing and recycling are two more great ways to help with CO2 output. If something gets broken, then it is better for our air to fix it rather than completely replacing it. Individuals and businesses in commercial areas, residential areas, and agricultural farms can do their part to help by simply using less electricity. Almost 31% of the pollution comes from electricity overusage and waste. The best way to help with wasting electricity is by getting energy-efficient appliances. These can greatly reduce the excess output of our daily tasks at work, school, and especially at home. Initially, the energy-efficient appliances can be more expensive than regular appliances, but in the long run, the money saved from the reduction of electricity and utility bills will greatly outweigh the initial costs. This is a good win-win situation because both money and energy can be saved. The government can do their part by putting restrictions on industry pollution, which makes up around 24% of our pollution. They could begin applying carbon capture technology, which takes the carbon that results from burning fossil fuels and stores it where it can't be released into the atmosphere. Underground, for example. It may not necessarily reduce carbon emissions, however, this technology would prevent much of it from reaching the atmosphere, which is the important part.
The initial political reaction when asked about carbon emissions is simply ignored. This is due to false ideas that some people may have. People like President Donald Trump claim that climate change is a hoax and that China is using it to try and take down the American industry. It is because of this ideology that it is hard to convince the government to make more regulations over carbon emissions. Although this issue has not been well recognized within the U.S. government, it is nothing new. In fact, in the 1980s, people with various backgrounds brought climate change onto the table. Although with other hot-button issues, the Yale program on climate change communication explains that most registered voters think that climate change is happening, including 95% of liberal Democrats, 88% of moderate/conservative Democrats, and 68% of liberal/moderate Republicans, but only 40% of conservative Republicans.
What can we do to mitigate the damage? Well, first we must move away from fossil fuels as an energy source. There are many clean alternatives, the most common of which are biomass, wind, solar, geothermal, nuclear, hydroelectric, and hydrogen energy. Nuclear energy is now becoming a more viable option, and environmentalists are considering it as one of the most efficient ways to produce energy. Hydrogen energy would be very useful because once hydrogen is separated, it can be used as a fuel for generating electricity. Hydrogen is a tremendous source of energy and can be used as a source of fuel to power ships, vehicles, homes, industries, and rockets. It is completely renewable, can be produced on demand, and does not leave any toxic emissions in the atmosphere. Existing coal and oil plants can be converted into integrated gasification and combined cycle plants. So government can reduce the current emission levels of greenhouse gases and at the same time supply energy at the prevailing rates. In conclusion, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change states that the goal of the mitigation is to stabilize greenhouse gas levels in a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change, ensure that food production is not threatened, and to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. In order to mitigate and adapt to climate change, there needs to be action on the state and federal level. In other words, we as citizens need to make our voices heard by contacting the men and women and representing them in Congress.
So carbon emissions are what's left over after you complete an activity that probably involves burning carbon or using carbon in some way.
Okay.
Or carbon-based kinds of things like oil or coal.
Yeah, exactly. What would you say is the main source of carbon emissions?
The main source of carbon emissions is probably burning fossil fuels, although I know methane has a lot to do with that. Cows and
Cows,
such.
yeah. Agriculture.
Yeah.
What's the third question?
Where do they come from?
What part of the earth do you think is the main contributor?
The main contributor to carbon emissions?
Yes.
I'm guessing that's the United States of America. Certainly on a per capita basis, maybe not in total, but we're probably pretty close to the top either way.
Pretty close in total. China's actually the number one.
Total,
Indonesia.
but probably not per capita.
Yeah.
So, that makes sense.
What can people do to help?
Yeah. What can people do to reduce their impact?
Well, they can make sure that their homes are sealed efficiently so they're not using too much heating and cooling, walk instead of drive, or take a bike instead of drive, do those kinds of things when it's possible. Not always possible for everybody. And I think just being aware of it and maybe reading the research so that they know what's actually true and what's not true. It's pretty clear what's going on with this if you actually read it and look for scientific evidence as opposed to emotional evidence.
Very definitive. Well, thank you. That was very insightful.
My pleasure. Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you so much.
All right, guys.